So, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today at this palliative care volunteering hot topic session on autism and inclusive volunteering. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're meeting on the traditional country of the Kaurna people and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And it's my pleasure to introduce Adam Lopez, who'll be facilitating today's session. Adam currently works at Orana as a volunteer ability engagement officer and has been working in the disability sector for almost 4 years. Adam has lived with a disability his whole life, and as time has gone on, he's become a disability educator and advocate and has reached the amazing milestone of educating over 3,000 people throughout Australia about disability and neurodiversity. So, welcome, Adam.
Thank you. What a beautiful introduction. This training is something that we usually do over 2 or so hours. So I've had to condense it. So I will be moving fast. If you do have any questions, we'll have a time at the end to talk about it. If you want me to expand on anything in particular. But this is a very, complex disability that affects people very differently. And because of that, there's going to be a lot of information coming at you thick and fast. So, as mentioned, I live with this disability, and so have kind of made it my hyper focus, I guess, to learn as much as possible about how I live, which then helps me find the tools that are effective for managing this disability. So let's start right from the beginning. What is neurodiversity? Um, this is a quote that comes from Harvard University's Nicole Barmer. The word neurodiversity refers to the diversity of all people, but is often used in the context of autism spectrum disorder, uh, as well as other neurological or developmental conditions, such as ADHD or other learning disabilities. The neurodiversity movement emerged during the 1990s, aiming to increase acceptance and inclusion of all people while embracing neurological difference. So the core idea is that we all think in different ways. Our brains are all structured in different ways. And there are neurological trends that we then assign diagnoses to and that sort of thing. So my brain developed differently and functions differently than other people. It is part of a natural divergence of neurology. Now, 1990s is a very important time. It is a time where a lot of us got together, had a voice for change. Previous to this, a lot of research around ASD, ADHD wasn't being done. A lot of us were just being put in the too hard basket. So it was a big point of change in 1995. The majority of the funding for this research came about. We are now in 2025, 30 years later, the minimum amount of time for a longitudinal study, which means that a lot of the research that is coming out in the last couple of years is brand new. So I have what I like to call the Triforce of neurodivergence, the trifecta, if you will. I am autistic, I have ADHD, and I have dyslexia. These neurotypes very much interlinked. Recent studies show that around 70% of people with autism are likely to also have ADHD and vice versa. So, what is autism? We know it is related to the cerebellum, the core part of the brain at the back, the way that we, process, intake information, all that sort of stuff, right? Um, we also know it occurs in early development and has a genetic component. So quite often, we will see children who have autism or ADHD. We will have evidence that that may be the case for the parents. This isn't guaranteed. The genetic markers for it are very varied, and you need to have certain genetic markers line up for it to occur. We also know that it happens in utero, so at while the child is developing and before they're born. Um, Postmortem studies have shown that autistic people have more neurons on average, more of the white matter of the brain. So whatever is occurring in that development period is causing a lot more neurons to be all interconnected with one another. But this also kind of shows we've kind of seen this as like a phantom thing, a mysterious thing. There is a physical component we can identify. Um, it also affects the intensity and regulation of the nervous system. Something to take note of if you are neurodiverse and you're going to go through surgery or something like that, please tell people, because I know that there's all sorts of problems with doctors and how they deal with us, but um, we can be affected by anesthesia differently. It usually gets flushed out of our system sooner. A lot of cases where people wake up during surgery, it may be related to neurodivergence. And this is all because our nervous system sends really powerful signals all the time. And it is not caused by vaccinations. So in Norway, which is a place that is generally unaffected by, big pharmaceutical companies and that sort of thing, they did a study of over 500,000 people to test the correlation between vaccines and autism, and found no correlation whatsoever. It's one of the most robust medical studies we have. Um, which is a bit of a shame because we could have used that money to research better coping mechanisms, other things like that. People who are autistic do not lack empathy for others. In fact, it seems to be the opposite. So there's a very common misconception. We tend to come off as cold or abrupt or those sorts of things. It's where a lot of those social skills, deficits come in. We don't want to make eye contact, all that kind of thing. This seems to be more linked to the result of an overwhelming amount of empathy, an overwhelming amount of care for those around us, causing us to have to manage those feelings, manage that experience by creating distance, right? And so while a lot of us are accused of lacking empathy, it couldn't be further from the truth. So what does this mean? Does this mean for my experience, or what do all these statistics mean? This is the governing factor of autism. This is, if you take away nothing else from this conversation, it is important that you take this. People with autism take in up to 40% more information from their environment. So what does that mean? The world to me is up to 40% louder. I can hear very, very minute sounds. Those bug things that were all the craze in the early 2000s, you plug something into a wall and it makes a beep every now and then, and the bugs go away. But you're not meant to hear it. It's meant to be ultrasonic. I can hear it. Um, if I take my I don't wear a ticking watch because I can hear it all day. If I take it off, put it in a drawer, and then try to sleep in a quiet room, I can still hear it. The world is 40% more bright. The world is 40%. I experience 40% more touch, so I have to be careful about what I wear because if my shirts move too much or I can feel the hairs on my legs, all that sort of stuff. And taste. You'll find that a lot of us find it very difficult to eat certain foods. Part of that is the texture, and part of it is the taste is more intense. Sorry, my cat is emerging in front of me. I'll just go to move him. Um, so that makes the world a much more intense place to live in. And with modern advertising, all that sort of stuff, it can be overwhelming. So people with autism experience greater stress, um, which can affect our long-term health. If you think of like constantly being bombarded with information, it's going to cause more stress. So one component of this is that our brains are designed to only take in so much. We're very good at cutting unnecessary information. When you turn your head too quickly, your eyes turn off because that's information you don't need, and it'll also make you nauseous. So our brains find it very difficult to cut out unnecessary information. That those sensory experiences build on each other until we hit a threshold. Our brain releases a signal that tells us we're under attack. So we get an adrenal response to all of this noise, whether it be visual, audio, sensory. So when we understand that, most of the things that we call symptoms around autism are actually strategies for managing stress. So if you see someone with a pair of noise cancelling headphones, right? They're blocking out an entire sense that isn't necessary for them at the time, that then lowers their stress. If you see someone often will wear sunglasses because, again, the world is very bright, it lessens the amount of pressure or stress. Or you'll see us play with fidgets and things to lower our stress because this is something I can control. I can play with it and I can draw my focus away from the environment, which is causing stress, towards something that is controlled in my hands, and therefore be lower my stress. So how does that then relate to the social component? One of the biggest components that we talk about is how this affects our social skills. And it is exactly for the same reason. There is a part of your brain called the fusal face form area. Its sole job is to recognize faces. So when you're going throughout your day and you're walking down the street, in 0.5 of a second, every time that you see a face, you will calculate whether you know that person what emotional state they're in, where they're looking, as they assess whether they're a threat. All of those things happen before your conscious brain can actually react. So when someone with autism walks down the street, that's happening, but there's a part of them that is like conscious of it. And it is causing that same kind of sensory input. Um, and so through that, some people manage by becoming nonverbal. Some people manage by not looking people in the eye because it stops that triggering from happening. Um, and if you are having that social interaction, that constant kind of buzzing of activity that's happening in the back of the brain then causes them to trip over their words, find it more difficult to do those, like, you know, small talk stuff, how's the weather, that sort of thing. And all of that small talk helps us go, I'm okay and I'm a safe person, and you're okay and you're a safe person. And so when we fail to do that, when we it becomes clumsy or something goes wrong during that conversation, what tends to then happen is you go, "Ooh, there's something wrong here. This person isn't safe." And so for that reason, people with autism are one of the largest populations of victims of crime, violence, all of those sorts of things. Because the thing in our brains that go, oh, this person is a safe person to be around, um, tricks us into believing they are not safe because they're not communing that you're okay, I'm okay. So, how does it feel? How does it feel for me while I'm traveling through life? So, I sometimes call it overcharging the engine. This is also a component of the ADHD. I'm constantly thinking. I'm often thinking more than one thing at a time, which then, you know, causes me, I have multiple streams of thought. I have to manage that. I have to keep myself calm, all that kind of thing. I need to avoid that being other people's problem, I guess. Um, we almost all have issues with sleep for that reason. If your mind is racing throughout the day, you then go to settle down, you go to relax, you go to sleep. It can be very difficult. And then if you have a lack of sleep one day, and then the next day you're still having those racing thoughts, it then becomes even harder to manage as you get into sleep deprivation and that sort of thing. Um, so we find ways to control, again, that stress. And part of that is structure. Knowing what I have to do and when becomes essential for me to make my day more predictable, which therefore lowers my stress. So all the things that other people do to manage stress, we have to do more and we have to do better. So we need to learn those breathing exercises. We need to learn to know when our stress levels are getting high so that we can remove ourselves. And creating a structured life helps stress immensely. Um, it can also be a blessing. As I said, this disability has become, and disability in general has become a hyperfixation for me, which has made me much, much better at my job. Because I'm much more understanding if I'm constantly doing research and I'm constantly learning new skills. And then I can also pass the skills that have worked for me onto other people. We're also good at seeing and understanding patterns in systems. We are exceptional at things like WH&S. We tend to be exceptional in like governance and things like that. A lot of us work in government, seeing how structures don't work and figuring out ways to make them work. Because having things in a neat pattern, in a neat system, having things function, again, lowers stress. So it becomes a big motivator for us. And so we get very good at it. We are often the people who realize that we go into an organization, we see a thing that some people have been doing for ages. We go, why do people do this? Oh, well, we've been doing that for as long as anyone can remember. It's like, well, it's not the most efficient way to do it. Have you ever tried this? Right? Um, so in that way, we can be a real asset to organizations, to your volunteer roster. We can also find it difficult to transition from one task to the next. One thing that we see a lot in children, especially, is the beginning of the day when they arrive at school and the end of the day when they go home. Even if they really want to go home, they're really excited to go home, is really overwhelming because the context of our environment matters. And changing context can be difficult. So at the end of the day, at the end of my work day, I need to set time for me to transition out of work brain. And I think all of us experience this. I think it's just heightened by the experience of autism. Um, and I seek the tools to make the world feel less noisy, less bright, and less chaotic. I'm constantly learning new ways to manage. And what I need to manage and how I deal with stress is going to be completely different to everyone else who lives with this same disability. Because everyone you've ever met, you would know there are similarities in how we deal with stress, but everyone has their own stress relief, their own way to manage stress. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a talking about autism, but I can't talk about autism without talking about ADHD just because of how linked they are. So I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. It stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. A lot of people misunderstand. Hyperactivity does not have to happen in the environment or the person is like rushing around. It can happen inside the brain. But there is some kind of hyperactivity. It is a complication related to the dopamine pathway in the brain. It can now be seen and identified on a CT scan. So again, it is a physical thing we can measure and see. We ask certain questions and we can see the passage of signals through the brain and identify a lag or a delay there, which would indicate ADHD. ADHD can affect impulse control. When I was younger, the way I describe it is those like intrusive thoughts that we all have. Sometimes I would have an intrusive thought and I'd be doing it before I even consciously realized. And that can be a big problem in social situations, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes we say the wrong thing, sometimes we do the wrong thing because the impulse hit and then we're doing it. It took me a lot of practice to create a conscious delay between thought and action. And this is why a lot of people think we grow out of ADHD. We don't. We just get much better at controlling it and ourselves, the greater symptoms of ADHD. Both autism and ADHD are often misdiagnosed, especially in women. Then the reason for that is how society, we as a society, view women versus men. If I am weird and quirky and boisterous and all those sorts of things as a man, no one cares. If you are loud and boisterous as women, um, unfortunately, society jumps on that instantly. And so we get a lot of misdiagnoses of, um, you know, things like BPD, bipolar personality disorder, or bipolar, because they're like, oh, you're having these big mood swings. No, you've been keeping it inside for a month, and then let it explode out, and people go, oh, clearly you're going through cycles. No. Um, so what does this mean? So the big thing I want you to take from this one is dopamine. Here's what dopamine does. Dopamine is the go hormone, right? And it's the reward. So if you run a marathon and you reach the end and you're just so happy that you've done this, that's dopamine. But dopamine is also the thing that got you up every morning to practice. So from the moment we wake up in the morning and get out of bed and have a shower, that's dopamine. So if you have a low amount of dopamine, it's going to be really difficult to do some of even the most basic stuff, right? Especially if you're not interested in it, if you're not driven to do it. So doing the dishes, all those kinds of things can be really frustrating. You might struggle to start, and then you get a hit of dopamine too late, like when you're already doing the thing, and that'll convince you, oh, I'm meant to be doing something else, because that's how the brain interprets that. So then you go and you start cleaning the lounge room, and then you get into your bedroom to put something away, and you get another bump. You go, oh, I'm meant to be putting away these clothes, doing the laundry, something else. You end up doing 10 things and finishing none of them. Um, or you can have too much dopamine, in which case you end up really hyperfixating and end up, uh, you know, hyper focusing on a particular task. So as I write here, it can mean that you feel a bit like people who experience writer's block, where you feel like you can't get started. And then uh, you need to focus on your passions and the things that make you feel creative. Um, we can find ourselves, one of the biggest problems, I think, with ADHD is frustration and dealing and managing frustration. When you try to do something and you can't, for whatever reason, it's really hard to then go, okay, well, I need to step away from this. I need to take a break and I need to start again. That can be really, really difficult. So, yeah, you've just got to take the time, be good to yourself, which is also very hard, and find ways to manage that frustration and channel yourself elsewhere. Now, if you can find the passion, then you'll do fine, but that's easier said than done. And everyone who experiences neurodiversity, as I say, experience it differently for all the reasons that I've outlined. Now I'm already at 11. Do we want to grab questions or? Yeah, do we have any questions?
I think there was a question in the Q&A button.
Yeah.
So why does mild autism sometimes present as hyperactivity and being overly friendly?
So again, that is that relationship between autism and ADHD, right? The over friendliness can often be a part of that impulse control thing. I want this person to be my friend. And so I will do what I can to make that happen. I'm very motivated with via the dopamine to do that. Was there any other questions?
Fantastic, Adam. I can't see any other coming through, but we have had some great feedback just saying very clear so far. Thank you so much from Jessie.
Again, I'm sorry that it was such a pace, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to contact me. If you want. And yeah, I'm more than happy to answer any questions people might have.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Adam, for today's session. We really appreciate you giving up your time today and for explaining the various types of neurodiversity and also for sharing with us insights about how to best support people with this condition in volunteering settings. Your session certainly has broadened my understanding about how overwhelming the environment and information overload can be for people living with autism in particular. And thanks for sharing with us how people with autism handle these situations. Just to let everyone know that this webinar is a series, and for our next sessions, we have secured expert speakers on topics of dementia, grief and bereavement, spirituality, rituals, and faith. And you'll also receive further details about these events via email. So we'll send that out to you shortly, and we'd love for you to join us again at another session. And the webinar will also be uploaded onto YouTube, so you can rewatch this session again, or please feel free to share it with your friends. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending today, and hope you have a great day. Thanks.